DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
From First Paw Media, sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company, this is the Dog Driver Show. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert Forto and Parto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert and we are the Dog Driver Show. I'm here with my co-host KP and it is a warming up finally here in Alaska, isn't it?
Yeah, the temperatures suddenly are above the sub-zero temps that we had. We are not used to in South Central, the negative 20s and negative 18s, and not very friendly to our dogs. So we've been sitting and not training for a few weeks, I guess.
Well, you know, we're going to have a pretty special show today. We're going to talk about the Eagle River Classic, which is the premier race that's held at the Chugiak Dog Mushers Association. And we have two parts to this. We have, of course, KP is our host, but he's also going to be on the other side of the mic today and receive an interview. But we also have, calling in from Chugiak, is Jim Welch, and he is a plethora of history comparing the Chugiak race and all that's involved. Jim, how's it going today?
Just fine.
Thank you for joining us today. Could you do us a favor and just briefly tell us who you are and what you're all about, please?
My name is Jim Welch. I came up to Alaska in 1977, started dog mushing in 78, bought 5 dogs from George Atla, got bitten, got the addiction, increased my kennel, eventually ran the Rendezvous 3 times, was a early member of Chugiak Dog Mushers, and my claim to fame, though it may seem a little sacrilegious right now, is that one season, I beat George Atla 3 out of 4 races, including the Rendezvous.
You know, Jim, it's interesting that you mentioned George Atla. We've talked to a heck of a lot of folks on this show, and of course his name comes up. And of course, with the recent documentary on PBS, lay people, folks that aren't involved with the sport of dog sledding or mushing, know that name now and know what he's all about. So you were racing amongst legends back in the day. So before we jump into the history, how do you think things have changed since the late 70s, early 80s when you were heavily involved with the sport?
I think there's probably 3 basic changes. First of all, the biggest change is the dogs. The Alaskan Husky has been a dog bred for working initially, and then transportation and racing, and it's always been the village dog has been the basis. Various hound crosses have been tried at various times, but they never seem to work out because though they added speed to the dogs, there never was the endurance required to run some of the harder races. But when Egil Ellis came and brought his pointer, German Shorthair pointer crosses and mixes in with the Alaska Husky, that changed things so that not only does the look of the dog change, the temperament of the dog has changed. All the Alaskan Huskies were much harder-headed and I would say tougher-minded than the current race dogs. Second, I think the general control and training of the top mushers maybe the same as it was in the past with the very top mushers, but you have more control over speed and in the course of a race. They can slow dogs down, speed them up, and time dogs, especially wearing like GPS watches. They can tell how fast they're going and really stay up with their competitors in real time in the course of the race. And then I think the third thing that's changed is that the care, both veterinary and nutritional care and overall well-being of dogs has greatly increased. Doc Lombard back in the day told me that he thought he was enlightened when he gave his dogs a fresh scoopful of snow for water. Well, now we know that water is the most important nutrient a dog gets, and so dogs have water available all the time in summer, and in winter are watered at least twice a day so that they have the adequate hydration. So I think those are the biggest changes in general in the sport.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head for sure compared to what a lot of other folks are saying as well. Let's jump over to the Chugiak mushing and what's happening in that part of Alaska. When we talk to folks all over the world, they all say that they love to come to Alaska to race, and I think a big part of that is racing on those trails there at the Chugiak Dog Mushers Association. They're absolutely beautiful. I'm a more of a distance and expedition guy, but when I go there, it feels like I'm running on a racetrack, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. What was your role in the early days of the club, and how has that progressed over the last 4 or 5 decades or so?
Okay. I joined the club when I came up here in 77, but I didn't really start racing till 78. And I ran in my first Eagle River Classic, which you want to get to later, in 79. Prior to 79, the Chugiak Trails started at Beach Lake Park, but ran almost entirely on Fort Rich roads and trails, which were really nice. And then the military got a little more concerned with national security, and so they gave us a permit to run for a few years, and then they shut down the access altogether, put tank traps across the trails. So in 79, the summer of 79, the club got permission from the municipality of Anchorage to build a trail system within Beach Lake Park. And that summer, I won't say every, but a lot of club members came out every Tuesday and Thursday night and Saturdays, and with chainsaws, axes, and machetes started clearing the trails, which became the trail system in Beach Lake Park. I happened to be president in one of those early years, but it was a lot of people contributed. Dwayne Hart led the construction crew, if you will, of the trail system, and gradually they grew. When they started out, as you can imagine, they were rough. In 1980, I shattered a kneecap when I bounced into a frozen hammock going out on an initial run, and they were rough. And every year, the club smoothed them out, brought in cats, made them smoother, cut out sharp corners. And every year, I think probably for the last 40 years, has improved those trails. They're interesting trails, and I found one of the things, I don't know if it's unique, but it's special about the trails, is the dogs don't seem to get tired of them. You can train there every day, and they don't get tired like they would if on a trail where they're going out, turning around, and coming back. There's ups and downs and curves and interesting change of scenes, or you're in the woods, and then you're out on the swamps, and then coming around on the lake. So that's basically how the trail system evolved.
And even to this day, Jim, we're still changing and modifying those trails. And I think KP will mention that when he comes on in a bit. Just this year, we added several miles of trail that we've never used before. So I think each year it gets better and better. And I think that really changes training and racing on those trails immensely. Let's go over to the Eagle River Classic now. You had said that you started racing in the late 70s. Was that about the same time when the Eagle River Classic started, or did it start much earlier than that?
I've asked around, and no one could seem to remember when it exactly started, but I'm going to say the early 70s. When I came up here in 77, the old trail groomer in Anchorage, he wasn't that old at that time, who ran mostly 7-dog at the time, Stan Barney, told me that he wanted to win the Classic a third time so he could retire the trophy, and that was in 77. So that means he had won it twice before. So I'm guessing the early 70s.
That KP and I were talking off air, and we said that we think that the early races were run similar to how they used to run Iditarod there by the VFW in Eagle River, and then onwards to similar to where the Chugach trails are now. Is that correct?
No. Dixie Waddell, who was one of the early club members, told me that the very early races started out at Pipple Field in Eagle River, which is somewhere behind the post office and long gone now. So I'm not aware of that. I know that one year they were held on the bike trails going from Eagle River up to North Birchwood over the Glen Highway and back. But that was only 1 year. That was trying to give it more public exposure. So I'm not aware of any races starting at the VFW, just being that early. It was the first checkpoint for Iditarod when they used to go from Anchorage to Eagle River.
Okay. All right. And before we bring KP on to talk about sort of the current status of the Eagle River Classic, when was the last time you were involved with that race and or heavily involved with mushing yourself?
Well, okay. I retired from racing myself in '86 when I was diagnosed with MS. And then I was involved with Carolyn Johnson and helped her race through the early 90s. So I guess I was still involved with the club heavily through the early 90s.
So earlier you learned about First Paw Coffee Company, and now I'm going to tell you about its Tail Wagger Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Tail Wagger Blend is their first offering, and its name and label were crowdsourced from their Facebook fans. How cool is that? The Tail Wagger Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It is a medium roast from Colombian beans with tastes of Brazil nuts, grapefruit, and oak. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.
The Dog Driver Show is brought to you by Dr. Tim's Pet Food, makers of such foods as Momentum, Fusion, Glacier, and Pursuit Athletic Dog Foods. Dr. Tim's has fed 5 of the last 8 Iditarod winners and some of the fastest sprint dogs on the planet. Dr. Tim's, a food for success.
KP, so you're sort of the new generation of the Eagle River Classic. I know that you're heavily involved with the promotion and of course, maintaining the trails. You're racing it together. So talking to Jim about sort of the early days in the 70s compared to when you've been involved, what do you see things are changing, I guess, over the years?
Well, for me, one of the main things which actually I was part of was when we introduced the limited class to the Eagle River Classic, because historically the Eagle River Classic was only an open class race, and we used to bring a lot of top names, your Streepers, your Johnsons, your top competitors for Rendezvous or ONAC, they would show up here and duke it out and go up and down these mountains. However, I believe it was in the early 2000s or right in the 2000s, the club decided to have your 4-dog, 6-dog, 8-dog class included in it. So for me, that's probably the biggest change for what it used to be.
And I know that you're involved with a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and in particular, making sure that the trail is good. And we talked to Carl Earhart just a couple of weeks ago about up at the Fairbanks trails. How does that come into play with not only your preparation for your team, but also to make sure it's a heck of a nice trail for the racers?
As Jim said, it's a effort from every single member of the club. I couldn't have done it by myself because it's just too many miles and too many hours it would take. My personal goal on a yearly basis is adding new miles and also improving the trail system, make it safer, faster, and better. Faster is better for me. So we try to take the humps out, take the sharp corners, like Jim said, out, and it's a lot of work. Of course, it's a lot of work. It takes hours at night, grooming and preparing. Summertime, cutting trees, bulldozer work, bobcat work, axe work, shovel work, all of that. But at the end of the day, it's a pleasure to take your dog team through this trail. As Jim said, it is a trail which is very, very demanding. It's fun. It's fast. It's a little bit technical, but it's getting safer and safer and faster.
So I think maybe this is a question for both of you, and I'll ask it to Jim first. Jim, I know you said that you've done the Ronde and other types of races. How do you think that type of race where you're racing, of course it's apples and oranges, but you're racing through the city on the Ronde and whatnot, and then maybe races in Fairbanks where it's much different than a race like the Classic. What do people get when they race these different types of races, whether they're racing in the city versus in the trails on Chugach? What do you think?
I think they get a sense of how better trained their dogs need to be. The exposure to peoples, to culverts, to noise. I had a leader once that Carl Huntington raised, and his kids used to teach it tricks. And whenever the dog did the tricks right, they would clap. So I can tell you, I had that dog later on, and when we ran the Rendezvous, when people clapped along the streets, I swear that dog just perked up and just took off even faster. Chugach trails are interesting because they have a culvert, and a lot of dogs are unfamiliar with them. And in the early Rendezvous, a lot of teams who had never experienced would come around the corner into a culvert and see it as a big black hole, and would balk and have trouble. The culvert at Chugach gives early season exposure to that, and anybody who goes there, it is one more hurdle dogs are trained to be at ease with.
Okay, and KP, what do you think the cachet is to racing at Chugach compared to the Ronde and even Tok and other places like that?
Yeah, actually, I 100% agree with Jim. Running Chugach personally, it's helping me tremendously to prepare my dog team for Rendezvous and ONAC. When I first year we took a dog team to Rendezvous, everybody was asking me, "Aren't you worried about the culverts?" I'm like, "No, I've been through it 50 million times. Are you okay with the bridges?" "Yeah, I've been over bridges many, many times." "Have you seen gates?" "Yep, we've been through gates many, many times." Cordova Hill, guess what? We have Heartbreak Hill. Same thing at home. So it's very, very physically, mentally helping and assisting my dog team at least to perform in a bigger race, especially Rendezvous. And the dogs that go through the system, unfortunately, as we lost quite a bit of our trail system to the gravel pit that the Native Corporation is putting at the end of the trail. So we have to do loops and to get the mileage for the dog team. And mentally, they have to be extremely tough to be able to handle these going around and around in loops, because as Jim may agree with me, the dogs are animal of habits, and taking them through the same loop, doing another 10 miles or another 5 miles through the same loop early season or even now, it's tough. What do you think, Jim?
I agree.
Yeah. So, KP, you had mentioned in years past a heck of a lot of big names used to run in the Eagle River Classic. You had talked about the Streepers and some folks that come up and spend the entire winter up in Alaska. And for folks that are listening that may not be involved with the sport of dog mushing, it's on a circuit, and they do one race after another on weekends, so no races compete with each other, so to speak. So the Eagle River Classic is pretty much at the beginning of the season, and since I've been involved with the Chugach Club since, I don't know, 8 or 9 years now, I haven't seen the big names like you had mentioned in the early 2000s. Why are they not coming up anymore to run a race like the Chugach? Why are they coming later to run Rondi and the races in Fairbanks and Tok and whatnot afterwards, you think?
The first year when I won the open class in Eagle River Classic, I was all thrilled to have my name next to these guys. Your as I mentioned, Streepers and Johnsons. And I think the main reason is the number of the open class kennels are being reduced. That's number one. You used to have 20, 30 teams, and now you have 10 or 7 because of the cost, because of the logistics, the time that would take. And as we talked about many, many times, the global warming and all of the challenges that bigger kennels are facing. So that's one. Number 2 was the purses. And, we had bigger purses. People, they would travel and do the circuit literally professionally. Dog trucks, they would take off from Canada or lower 48 and come and do the circuits race after race and hit every one of them. You don't see that anymore as much. You probably see 2 or 3 dog trucks doing that for 2 or 3 times, 2-3 months of the year. So I think that's probably the reason. The Classic is in my opinion, one of the top 4 or 5 open class races in Alaska, period. If you do well at Classic, there's a good chance you do well at Rendezvous. There's a very good chance you do good at Tok or Onak also.
Jim, do you have anything to add to that, you think?
Yeah, the Classic started out primarily as a race for club members back in the early days, and there were a lot more teams in the area, in the South Central area, that participated. And it was kind of like a culmination of the season. It used to be later in the season, and everybody would kind of get together for one last hurrah. I remember the first time I ran it, I ran with 5 dogs, and that year I'd never run my dogs more than 6 miles, and it was a 12-mile race, and I came in 5th the first day, and people were going, "Oh, that's amazing." And the second day, they kind of tuckered out. We slipped to 8th, and that was the year that Charlie Champagne won. That was in '79. Then there was a time when we wanted to elevate the stature of the race and encourage bigger name teams from Alaska and even outside to come and participate. So the race was made longer, the purse was raised some, but I think in recent years in my view, it's gone back to catering first and foremost to club members, and if we can get other people to join the party, all the better. So I think it's sitting in a good place.
Excellent. KP, I have two more questions here on the show, and of course we can get Jim's thoughts as well. My first question to you, KP, is where do you think this race stacks up to other races around the world? And, you know, we talked to a lot of people from all over, Australia, Germany, Scandinavia, and they all say that they love coming to Alaska. So what would you say in terms of comparison to other races that you've ran in around the world? Where does that Eagle River Classic sit in?
You know, we mentioned names, and like Jim said, big names, you know, your Ellis's, your Chizik, Tetzner, Champagne, McCormick's, Cornmullers, all the big guns who used to come and race these trails. One day I asked actually Egil Ellis, who's won this race many, many times, and he and I agree with him. These are probably the closest you can get to some of the European races that we had in Germany, France, Austria, being in the woods, going up and down the mountains. And I think that is probably what I think. It's a race which is extremely well organized. It's a fine-tuned machine. There is no mistakes in it, or timing mistakes, or start mistakes, gates opened or gates closed, trail not prepared or groomed. Of course, we fight the Mother Nature. We do whatever we got with the snow and the conditions that we have, like we have this year. But a lot of members in our club, every single one of them, and you're a vice president of our club. We put a lot of efforts to make this race and this club a volunteer-based, successful organization.
Excellent. KP, last question I have for you, and I definitely would like to hear Jim's thoughts on this as well, is where do you see it going in the next 10 or 15 years? Of course, Mother Nature will definitely have a play in that. We were just talking on our other show that folks are still doing ATV training here towards the end of January. Where do you see the Eagle River Classic developing, or maybe even changing over the next couple of decades?
Well, one thing which has already been changed is the trail layout, and simple as this. That's the first thing. Before, we used to go down, people familiar with our system, they know we have a 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16, and 18-mile loop that we have, and going through some of the lakes. But because of the gravel pit that I just mentioned, which opened and cut our trail system, we cannot go further than 8 miles on the sprint side of our trail system. So we actually have to do loops to achieve the mileage that we have. So that's the direction that we are going. We have to fight for every single mile that we can get on the trail, and work with the Mother Nature, whatever we get. Maybe postpone the race, maybe have some other events in lieu of the Classic. But this race has been around for over 50 years, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even 60. I've been in this club for 20 years only, but Jim can tell you more. It's evolving. Every year it's evolving. Trails are getting sometimes shorter, but they're getting faster. They're better groomed. But we have to deal with the Mother Nature, whatever we do.
And one last point to that, KP, you had said that the sponsors aren't there like they used to be. And I know that you're heavily involved with recruiting sponsors for this race, and we talk a lot in the club meetings about the sponsors that are on board. How does the sponsoring public see this race as it is now, or maybe in the future, compared to how it was in the past? And I think this is where we can bring Jim in.
All of the event, the continuity has a lot of value for the sponsor. If you have a brand, and Eagle River Classic is a brand that you can promote year after year after year with the same type of conditions, it's way easier for a sponsor. It's very difficult to go talk to your local bank or your local car dealership or whatever and try to ask for money for an event which may not happen. And that's the tough part, I think.
Yes. Jim, can you speak a little bit on the sponsorship side of it, in the years past? And then secondly, where do you see it evolving? I know you're not heavily involved like you were in the 80s and 90s, but I'm sure you still follow it, armchair mushing, so to speak.
Yeah, you bet. I think there's two great issues that are going to affect dog mushing in the future. The first is that, like endangered species, one of the reasons that endangered species go extinct is because of loss of habitat. And when you've got increasing development and expanded population and encroachment on what used to be freely used trails, that makes it more and more difficult. When you get a higher population, it makes it more difficult to have larger kennels within an area close enough to the trails. That's one thing. That's always been an issue, and it increases to be, it continues to increase as an issue. The second is the fact of climate change. There's no denying it. From the very first rendezvous, whether it was 49 or 50, until 1986, a rendezvous had never been canceled. From 86 until present day, it's been canceled 7 times because of lack of snow, bad weather conditions. The dog racing community is going to have to come to terms with that, and whether that's technological innovations, better snowmaking equipment, more accessible. They have the Nordic Ski Club has a snowmaking machine that they use on their trails. I'm not sure what the answer is, but that's going to have to be reconciled. The fact is, our winters are getting warmer, and there's no way around that.
Jim, thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure hearing all of the history that this club has developed over the years, and of course, your early days with the Eagle River Classic. It was a pleasure. KP, thanks for being on the other side of the mic, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Thank you. All right, guys, on behalf of the Dog Driver Show, this is Robert and KP. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From First Paw Media, this is the Dog Driver Show. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you can see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert Forto and Kurosh Parto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.